Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar today. My name is Megan Morse, and I'm one of the product consultants on our retail team. Today, we will be reviewing the purchasing process within our master scheduling module. Okay, so just an overview of our product consulting team. We run these monthly webinars and are assigned to each of you to help with any support or training questions that you have. So you can always reach out to us directly and we can help you in any of those areas. As a reminder, we do have all of the attendees on mute, so please feel free to interact with us and ask questions or comments throughout the sessions using the Q&A option located at the bottom of the screen. So we are using WebEx instead of Zoom as opposed to our previous sessions. So just so you know, to access that Q&A icon, you need to expand at the bottom right corner those three little dots, and that gives you the additional options, which include the Q&A. Recording of this webinar will be sent to you via a link in an email as follow-up, but you can always access our previously recorded webinars either through our Fresh Desk support site under the webinar section, and there it's all organized for you by module, or also through our Cognizant YouTube site. So under the Cognizant YouTube channel, Digital Solutions Industries, and then the retail playlist. You can locate them in either of those areas. All right, so our agenda for today, reviewing the purchasing process, will begin with creating and maintaining the requisitions within our system, along with then reviewing the create action options and consolidating those needs across your product on one purchase order. And then we'll also be reviewing the suggested purchase order requisition process as well, which just is helping to streamline the ordering process using rules-based automation. Okay, so to begin with, an overview of master scheduling process. So as many of you are familiar with master scheduling module, it's really providing us with the key tools and information that's required to make smarter and more effective purchasing and scheduling decisions based off of your current forecast as well as your weekly inventory demand and position. There's really three main categories within the master scheduling section here that you see on the right hand side. So first is the planning category, which contains the various hot lists that you can access and look at on a day-to-day basis to really help you with prioritizing your tasks. We also then have the link to the materials planning screen, which is going to bring you directly into the inventory grid and view. Under the requisitions, we're going to take a look at creating a requisition from our system and exporting that back into your warehouse system for PO creation. And then we'll also be taking a look at our actions and the action list where you can combine multiple needs into that single requisition. Okay. So beginning with our hot list. So our hot list is what we encourage users to spend time really on a day-to-day basis, because this is allowing you to manage by exception and quickly identify what are those items that require a buy action or any other kind of inventory action. It's taking into account your product's lead time, your weekly demand, and any of those other factors that we're also considering within materials planning, bringing it all into this hot list so that you can then sort and filter and determine where these actions need to be made. The end goal here is to really address what are those day-to-day business questions you have. So are you looking to place reorders? Are you looking for markdown candidates, vendor roll-ups? Whatever it is that you're focused on, that's really what's going to drive the particular tabs and how you're going to work these hot lists. We do encourage you to just pick one or two hot lists that really make sense for your business. There are several hot lists at the bottom here. Some of our best practice tabs include the short-term net need unit and cost, which is what we're looking at here. And that's really essential for if you're looking to address any pressing need, you need to expedite or reorder items. It's going to tell you exactly what you need to buy. Our long-term net need costs in units is looking more across your total planning horizon. So addressing your long-term needs instead of what might be a short-term immediate action. And then we have our overage tab, which is really helping you to address where you're underperforming, looking at clearing out that inventory, canceling future purchase orders, or even those markdown candidates as we suggested. The last tab here is that short-term required units and cost. And this tab is probably one of the most popular across many of our users. It's looking at the total picture of not just what you need to buy, but also your accumulated back orders. So it's giving you that total picture that you can then sort and filter and start to determine what you need to do with these particular items.
Megan, just quickly, we did have a chat that someone was unable to see the screen. It may be the way they joined the Cisco WebEx, but we do see the screen here, correct? I do, you do. And so I think they just have to, rejoin. Also, we are recording this, so we will send a link to the recording to people here. So, okay.
All right, we can move on to the next. And then the next tab here is really just looking at how we can customize these columns to create views specific to what you're looking to address that day. So once you've determined those tabs that you want to work in, you should take the time to customize your view, bring those columns in and out of display, and then save that column layout so that you can easily get into it in the future. Once you've done that, really utilizing the sorting and the grouping options along with the filters up top to pinpoint those items and start to work through your list. We also offer the next review date, which can be defined here as well as in the materials planning screen. And that's useful just to help organize the list, or maybe you have something that you need to check back with the vendor at a later point in time. You can easily flag that to address it later on. The key with these hot lists is that they do link directly into materials planning as well as our vendor order review screen. So once you sort and filter and get these in the order and the condition that you'd like, you can then link directly into materials planning and work through these lists using that next option within the materials planning screen. So it's just helping to streamline the process here for you. Okay, so then moving into materials planning. So this is that total inventory schedule, the master view looking at your future weekly inventory levels by product as well as down to the SKU level. It's incorporating the key information like your weekly demand, your inventory ownership. We can factor in return rates as well as safety stock, and then also considering your product's lead time. Again, you can link directly from other screens into this inventory schedule. So if you're working in PLF, the Hotlist, like we mentioned, reports in the dashboard. Since this is such a key screen of our system, we offer easy access to it from multiple areas. It's broken out into a couple main sections here. So you'll see the product and the SKU details up top. The miscellaneous section down below contains a lot of the key information, such as the case lot rounding rules, your cost, minimum order quantities, and you can also define some additional factors that we'll take a look at here. And then down below is that main inventory view, your inventory schedule out into the future that you can take a look at and then start to act on your buy need. So some of the purchasing or buy factors that can be defined within the materials planning screen is that align to lot. So that's going to just do the case lot rounding rules for you based off of either the data that is fed from your vendor item file or defined through the product wizard. Our minimum order quantity, units, and cost is all here as well, and that can then help you with placing what is that minimum that you need for the vendor down to a particular SKU level. Our safety stock here is helping to protect inventory by allowing you to define a quantity that you always want in stock. So it's useful for dealing with any kind of variable demand or delays in your delivery. It's helping to ensure that you have that in stock. So even if it's something like most popular items, anything that you just want to provide an extra cushion with within materials planning to your net need, this is the best way to do that with the safety stock option. Our return in our back orders can also be considered here. So you can have the ability to create a curve, and that will be considered into the schedule and then fed out into the weekly demand so that you can consider those return rates for the highly returnable items. And then, like I mentioned here, you do have that option to defining the next review date from this screen as well, just to help you with organizing and staying on top of any items that need to be reviewed on a regular basis. All right, so executing out a buy plan from the screen. You're going to select the weeks of coverage that you'd like to determine what is that buy quantity that we should be purchasing. So as you can see on screen here, I've selected starting at week 19, which is the first week that I could receive the merchandise with that product's lead time. I'd like coverage out through week 24. And then you right click and indicate to the system what percentage of a buy need you'd like to place. So I'm placing 100% of my need here. And the system will then generate what that total quantity will be, not only at the product level, but also down to that SKU level. So if we move to the next slide, we can take a look at what that will look like. So here we see that generated quantity up top for week 19. And then specifically down below, by color and by size, where those quantities and those buys need to be placed. So we're not recommending that you buy all of the SKUs. It's really just dependent on that SKU demand, as you can see here. Once you've done that, you'll then, you have the option to align it to lot. So you'll do that case lot rounding rules. And then you'll have the ability to create the requisition, selecting that requisition option up in the top menu. Once you select that requisition option, it's going to bring you into the Create Requisition screen, which you can see here. It shows you the quantities that have been generated, and then also brings in the key vendor information, all populated from your vendor master and your vendor item tables. So all of that information is pre-populated for you and ready to go, and you have the ability to make adjustments to comments and other things like that up top. Down below, you can see we do have the ability to take into consideration those MOQ quantities here as well. So if you do have any items that are not meeting the minimum order quantity, you can easily adjust that using the right-click menu options and adjust all the MOQs to meet that minimum for the vendor in those SKUs. Once you've done that, just moving on a little bit more on the PO comments. So we have the concept of both standard and new entry comments. So your standard comments are ones that are specific to the vendor that you can always have available to you to add to this specific purchase order if needed, or you could create some new entry comments as well. And then the last step really in the process here is our two options that we have. First is our validate and save option, which is going to release the purchase order back into your order management system and really begin that PO export process and creation. Our validate and hold is intended to get that purchase order in a draft-like state. We still have it as a requisition in our system, and it's waiting there really for any future changes or updates that you anticipate. So let's say you're waiting for information from your vendor or supplier in terms of cost changes or quantities. You can have it in this ready to go state until you hear back, and then you can make those changes to execute it out. One of the key things to remember with the validate and hold is that it does remove the need from your materials planning and your Hotlist screens. The system is looking at it as a requisition that is going to be purchased. It just hasn't been sent out yet. So you just want to keep that in mind and not to leave any requisitions in that kind of status for a long period of time.
We had a question, Megan. Is there any way to override MOQ before validate and save? As far as I know, there isn't. I mean, MOQ could either come from your host system in the interface, Or it could be something that you set up in the dashboard in vendor items. The system will not let you validate and save if you don't reach that MOQ. So you'd either
Yeah.
have to make that adjustment the next day, make it in the dashboard right away if you're able to do that, and then do that, but you really can't override it.
Yep. Good question though. Okay, I'll turn it over to Linda then to continue.
Thanks, Megan, and good afternoon, everybody. So Megan reviewed how we create a requisition for a single product code. But if you have vendors with multiple product codes that you need on a requisition or purchase order, the process that we use internally is the action process. And so our recommended best practice when purchasing multiple vendors is you would go to the hot list, whether you elect to use the vendor hot list, the product hot list, or the SKU hot list. Your step would be to filter down to the products that need to be purchased. Typically you would group by vendor or whatever type of grouping you wish to use for making your purchases. And then you can drill in from that list of product codes into materials planning for the items that need to be purchased. So similar to requisitions, once you have determined that what if quantity and the expected dates that Megan had demonstrated, instead of selecting create requisition, we would select build action. Excuse me. So, and once you build the actions and you work through, so you build the action for product A, you can very easily move to product B by selecting the feature within materials planning called next, and it'll just let you walk through those list of product codes one after another to be able to build all the actions that you need. So once users have built their action list, they've determined what their needs are, these actions can be reviewed on the action list screen. And so there are multiple filter options on the action list screen. The most common that people will use will be by vendor. You may use by whom or for whom, depending on if somebody else created the purchase orders for you. But those are the most common that are used. A couple of common uses of the action list screen is to review your purchase orders for an upcoming season or possibly an upcoming month. So the inventory team may go in and they'll create the actions of what they wish to purchase and when they want to bring those quantities in. And then this can be easily reviewed with their managers or directors to determine if it's in line with the open to buy and demand needs of their categories. Some teams also have one group who may determine what the quantities are that need to be purchased and when to land that product, and another team may actually place the purchase orders and turn the actions into requisitions based on their import and containerization needs. So it could be spread out over multiple. If any edits are needed to be made to actions, they're very easy. You can double click on an action or you can select the action and then on your icon select the action maintenance screen to be able to go in and modify that action. And our next slide, we're actually showing what that action and maintenance screen looks like if you elect to go in. So the two most common edits that people might make on action maintenance would be they want to revise the quantity for whatever reason, or they may want to revise the date so that it can be consistent with other products, or they're changing the timing of when those actions might be adjusted. Once you are comfortable with all the actions and the dollars that are rolling up, we need to determine now, how do we create the requisition from these actions? And so to do this, you will go to the Create Requisition screen within Master Scheduling, and you'll filter your actions. And so you have the option, you can look at all actions, or you can filter it, which is the most common, that you could filter it down to a specific vendor. You can also filter by action type. And we always suggest as a best practice with clients is be creative with your action types. You know, you can use action types to help filter and identify actions based on FOB. You can identify actions based off of whether they are import or export. You know, if you select or you have multiple vendors that you purchase from, I use those action types to help filter and manage that product for you. But within the action screen, once you get your list of actions, you can go in and select which of the actions above that you want to assign and place on a purchase order. And they will be grouped by vendor by expected receipt date. And you can go in and you can select an entire expected receipt date, or you could select just one or two product codes within that. And you have the option to select finish, and that will add all of those actions to a particular purchase order. And then you would go through the steps that Megan talked about to actually create the requisition itself. Another tool we have that is fantastic to help and save a lot of time with purchasing is the suggested purchase order module. And so this tool helps remove the manual work that is involved with creating actions or creating requisitions. So the suggested purchase order model will roll up suggested orders or requisitions to the users every day with the master scheduling run. And clients have the option that they can vary their purchasing methods. You could select a coverage to identify, you know, you want to buy for 4 weeks or 8 weeks. You can select a minimum order, a reorder point quantity to determine a min and max option. So you just develop and determine what are the purchasing methods you want and what is the cadence that you want to use within those orders when you place them. How often do you want to place those orders? And a real key with that is it allows you to change your purchasing method by SKU for a style, because not all SKUs for a given style will sell the same. And so if you want more information on how suggested purchase order works, reach out to your CSC and they can provide that to you or give you a demo. But SPO offers two options for creating requisitions. One is the vendor order review screen, and that is really the workhorse behind SPO. This is the screen where people will go to do any maintenance or to do the analysis to analyze the quantities that are being suggested. You also have the option from the suggested rec hotlist that we can create requisitions there. So if you want within suggested purchase order to create your requisition from vendor order review, you can open the vendor order review screen and drill in. And within this, you can review and analyze the quantities that were being suggested. You can take a look and change the forecast method from what we were saying, a coverage method, to a min-max option. You can drill into materials planning if you want to take a look at the full planning horizon and break out of inventory by week. You have the option that you can change your vendor rules if there are min or max quantities that need to be adjusted. You can look at containerization to be able to see how and what percent of containers or truckload quantities that are being suggested or on the requisition. And once you are comfortable with the quantities, if you've made your changes or adjusted appropriately, all you need to do is select the Create Requisition screen at the top, and it would take you into the Create Requisition screen that Megan had demoed earlier, and you could create that rec. So this is a real key, easy way to get a purchase order written for a vendor all at one time. The second option that we have with suggested requisition or a suggested purchase order is to create the requisition directly from the hot list. And so this is sort of a next step after you've been using suggested purchase order for a while. Typically, it's where you know you have a consistent or an expected purchasing history and pattern. And so we offer two options. One of them is a manual option, where from the suggested rec hot list, you can select the vendor and you can select the product codes that you want to offer. You can see what the expected cost of that suggested rec will roll up to. You can see if there are any vendor rule items where the order may or may not be hitting the vendor minimums. And then you select manual, and that automatically takes you to the Create Requisition screen where you can finalize the order and place it. The other option that we offer is auto. And so on that same requisition hot list screen, you select the vendor, you select the hot list. One more, Stuart. Thank you. And so you select the hot list, the vendor, you select the SKUs under the vendor. And when you go to create requisition, you have the option to select auto. And this automatically creates the requisition. You avoid the entire header screen, all of the information. It is just now out there. It's been validated, saved, and it's ready to be sent to the vendor. So unless people have any questions, I'm going to turn it over to Stuart, who's going to talk to you and review the requisition lookup process.
Thanks, Linda. Requisition lookup is where you could review these requisitions. You could put in different filters here for vendor or user. You could look at different statuses. Your open status are your requisitions that are still within Softvision. So we have a PO export process that takes a requisition and sends it to the host system, where a purchase order is created in your host system, and then it comes back in a cycle, like in a loop, and it automatically closes the requisition. So depending on how your company is set up, a number of companies have it set up multiple times a day. That PO export process runs, so they might not see some of these open. Some have it just once a day. So if you clicked open, you would be able to see the ones that have not gone into the host system yet. You could also look at ones on hold. You may want to have some requisitions on hold until the vendor gets back to you, maybe with information. Maybe there's budget considerations you have. So that way it saves it on a hold status, and then when you're ready to release it, to send it to your host, to create the purchase order, you could then do a validate and save. You could also look at your close requisitions. If you wanted to see for a particular vendor all of the close requisitions, you could bring that in. Or if you have a particular requisition number, you could list it here. Put in the requisition number or click the drop down and you'd be able to review it. You could double click and then go in and review the requisition. The other thing we added on the screen is an approval process. You could set up within Softvision an approval process where certain users could only approve up to a certain dollar amount, a certain cost amount. And so once they do that, it needs to be approved by a manager or a director that would go in and approve these before these release. So you could check here ones that need approval, ones that were approved or rejected. And if a director or manager does reject it, they'd be able to put a reason, and you'd be able to see the reason here. If you do set up this requisition approval, it is a parameter that you would set up, and then you would go in the security module and set up these approval levels. You could set up a top level with no limit, let's say, and then you could have the users underneath that have a limit. And so you could see here that I'm set up, my approver is F21 owner, and my approval limit is $10,000 at cost. You could also set up an alternate, so this way if people are out of town, they could have an alternate person to go in and approve it. If you do set up the parameter and you do set up this maintenance, every user would need to be listed in here. Otherwise, they won't be able to create a requisition. So just something to remember. There's also something called historic receipts. This is different from requisition, and this is different from open purchase order. In Softvision, we do not store the actual receipts unless you send it to us on an interface. A number of companies send this to us. You'd be able to go into materials planning and see your actual receipts for those SKUs, which is good, but you'd also be able to run a number of DRS reports that will show you by vendor or by date what the actual receipts were, how much you actually ordered. You'd be able to see expected receipt date, and then revise receipt date. You'd be able to see whether your vendors are shipping on time. So a lot of that would have to come from your host, where we would have that actual information, and it's just something that you would add in the interface. This is from the interface manual. It's something you would just have to send us in this format. And with that, I'm going to go into a dashboard, and we'll go in and take a look at creating requisitions. So here I am in the product hot list. I'm going in for a certain vendor. I don't have to. I could do this by scheduler, but here I'm doing it for this vendor and this warehouse. And in this webinar, we're going to be working just with a single warehouse. And so there's other filters that you could put in here. You could filter this by status. And down here, we would see the different products that are on the hot list. Now, short-term net need shortage, short-term is a parameter. It's usually right at your lead time. It's telling you by lead time, you're going to have this amount of shortage. And it makes sense because here you see there's nothing on hand. Here I have future demands, let's say this one of 13,000, but I only have 4,800 on order. So I do have a shortage here. Long-term shortage would be at the end of your planning horizon. And that might be for things different from replenishment, maybe product development, longer lead time items. But this is showing me for this vendor, these are my needs. Here I don't have a short-term shortage because I have my future demand of 29,000 and POs of 56,000. So I would be covered, but I have what's called requirement units. Those are accumulated back orders. So for this first item, I have enough on order, but it's not coming in on time. I'm not capturing my back orders. So that's why we keep it on this tab. Here I added a next review date. Check vendor stock, the end of October. So I could go in and filter these if I wanted to ignore it, because I know that I can't buy this yet. But let's say I wanted to take a look and buy this item. I would double click and that'll take me into the materials planning screen. You don't have to come from a hot list. You could go directly from the dashboard. You could, up here, there's a icon where you could enter. Actually, I need to see it here. Show toolbar. Here's where you could enter the product to go directly to materials planning. You could go directly here, or you could link from PLF. But here I'm coming from the hot list. It's showing me what I need to buy. And if I take a look here, let me drag this up a bit. I could see that I do have needs here at a SKU level. The red shows me the lead time. This is an 8-week lead time. In week 9, I'm going to have a shortage of 2121. I'm going to have a shortage with these SKUs. So you can see based on the demand, based on the on-hand and other purchasing, it's different here. So I don't want to go in and buy SKU by SKU. I want the system to do it. So what I'm going to do is click here with the mouse and drag it. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right click, buy for all need, 100%. So you could go out as many weeks as you want, but you could see what the system did here. It put in these buys, and see here in week 16, I pretty much don't have a shortage here. I have a shortage of just 2. So I'm covered through that amount, and then you see here, I have other shortages. So again, you can make this shorter or longer. Then you could go into product by plan and align to lot. So this has a lot size, a case pack of 48 units. It automatically adjusted those. Now, if I go to requisition, it'll create that requisition for that amount. All right, so there's a number of different sections here. Some of these are parameters, like ship via. There's a parameter that says always set up ship via. There's some that says it's required. There's terms. Your terms usually come automatically here. Here you see it in gray. Here, here's a reason code. I have to set that up only because I know that's a setup here. But you have different options for these reason codes. Some of these are set up in administration. So when we look at administration and we look at master scheduling, some of these you could see PO reason codes and this action type. A number of these things are set up in administration. You also might have a custom purchase order form that we had developed for you. So that's also would come through in a drop down, and you might have that here. The expected date is filled in. You could fill in an optional ship date. Here's some other information. Let's take a look. I need to drag this up. Here you could see the individual products that are here, or the individual SKUs. It's aligned to lot. I could go up here to edit and do align to lot. I could also align to MOQ. You can't do that in materials planning, but you can do that here. You could either click it up here, or you could right click and say adjust MOQ, adjust MOQ all. So notice our cost here is $12,825. Now I adjusted the MOQ. I'm up to almost 16,000. Okay, because MOQ is something that we put here. There's a number of different options that you have. You could delete an item. Here's where you validate and save, where it's going to go to the host, or validate and hold. You can split the requisition a couple of different days if you want to. You could put a discount. Here's a requisition discount, which you could put either at the PO level or pro rate to line, put in a particular discount, percent off cost or amount off cost of freight, and apply it. You could also go in and, well, there's the adjust MOQ. In the view screen, you could sort by display order. You could customize the columns if you wanted to add more columns. There's a number of different tools. You see default day of the week. This is user specific. I have it Friday. So it probably makes sense for all the users to, depending on the vendors they're dealing with and the merchandise, to set up the same default day of the week. And so since we know we're coming in a particular week, it would actually create the requisition during that day. There's a number of different things that show here. There's one where you could adjust the cost in here if you wanted to. I think that's one of the tools. You could also view the calendar. The calendar will show you when it's coming. Notice that this is Monday. Once I do validate and save, validate and hold, it's going to come out to Friday. But you could automatically move this if you wanted to. This information will show you other POs that are due on that date. So it's good to be able to go into this calendar. There's information that you're feeding us on the open purchase orders. So you'd be able to see the number of other purchase orders coming in on that date. And so you could go in there, and here you see there's messages about the new expected date. I'm just going to say no on here. PO comments. You could either set up a general one or put one next to a line. Visibility could be internal only, PO only, which goes to vendor, or print both. And then these are standard comments that are set up. So you could go in and click and drag it here. It'll automatically fill that in. Okay, or you could add another PO comment also. Okay, so you could either have standard, or you could go in there and just type out a comment, whatever you want to put there. This will show you some vendor comments, information about the vendor, and history. It'll go in there and tell you, mostly with the approval process, something was approved or not approved. Right now, I'm going to cancel the requisition, only because I want to show you how this works with actions. Instead of the requisition, I could build actions. And we'll say this will build actions for all SKUs. Do you want to continue? Yes. You do get a message here about the current user or item master default. I'll say OK. And then it built the action. So it shows it as a receipt here. You could see that's a total receipt that's built there. Very quick to build actions. Now, why would I build actions? Because I want to add other products. I don't want to just use this product. So let's say I go to the next item. Here, let's say I also have a need. I might want to go to the same date and fill in the need that I have here. It's 2300. So let me do that. Let me align to lot and build actions. So now I have the action built. I could go in and quickly add actions to all of these if I wanted to. Then I could go to my action list, materials planning, and I could see all the actions. Let's say I wanted to just bring it in for this vendor. I could see all the actions. They were created by different people, but you could see here's the ones that we just did, 92993 that we did, and this 90109, I believe. Yeah, by created date. So these are the ones that we just did. And you could see, you could go in there and see the totals that are here. Okay, so there's your total quantity. It'll show you your total cost. Again, this just gives you information that's here. If I wanted to, I could go in and you could actually, you could delete the selected items. You could delete action. You could double click, go into action maintenance, make some adjustments here. But again, you don't have to do that. If I want to combine the actions, I could go to create requisition. So in create requisition, that'll go in and it starts on this screen. So let's say I bring in this vendor and I hit next. I could go in, click these two. It doesn't have to be the same expected date if you have the parameters set up, and I could click finish. So now I have this requisition where I combined these items, this 92993, some other ones that were created earlier. You could see some of these. I have to adjust MOQ units because it was in red. So now I have more than one product and SKU for this vendor. So that's a reason to do actions rather than requisitions. But another thing is suggested purchase order. Now let me go back to that 92993. Just want to show you, if we go down to a SKU level, you could see there should be a what if here. Yeah, there's a what if that'll show up with suggested purchase order. I think I might have to go from the SPO hot list. But let me go to the suggested requisition hot list. So here I have it for this one vendor. It combines all of the buys. So instead of going in to the hot list, doing the what if, or doing the actions, the system will automatically combine these for one warehouse and one vendor. And so I could go here, let's say I click on this one, this has different receipt dates. I could go in and I could create new requisition. I could do manual, it'll bring up a requisition, or I could do auto. But instead, I'm going to go into what's called vendor order review. So in the dashboard, you could see Suggested purchase order, there's a suggested requisitions hot list. There's an expedite hot list, which actually shows you a list of open purchase orders that you may want to expedite. And then there's vendor order review. So all these are part of the same. If I click on this, I could go to vendor order review. It'll bring up this screen, and then it'll bring up all of the SKUs and products combined. And here you see we have vendor rules that we have here. This one failed because we have a vendor review vendor rule that there's a minimum quantity here. This passed. Here we have 9 lines, so we have all of these SKUs that added together. The SPO method here is coverage. You have a number of different options here. The ones used most are coverage, which will cover a certain number of weeks, and ROP, which is reorder points, which is a min-max, which is used for those items that either have sporadic demand or they're very expensive. And here you see configure coverage. You could go in for this vendor and say, I want to cover for 8 weeks. The system will go and it'll automatically figure what your buys are. And so rather than go the hot list and doing this yourself, you could go in there and the system will do it for you. If I double click here, I could go into materials planning, and you see it'll add it here. Here's the SPO units, is 1248. And you'll actually see this 1248 here. I think I said something ran here that didn't show it. But you would see these SPO units, which are suggested. So the system will automatically set those up for you, and then you could create the requisition. So you'd go to vendor order review because it gives you much more information. Now, suggested purchase order there's a lot to it. It's very involved. We did a webinar years ago. We're going to do another one this year, either in November or sometime towards the end of the year. So we'll let you know about that, but we are going to expand vendor order review and show that a little bit more involved. Let me go to requisition lookup and approval. Again, here's where you could go in, as I showed you before. You could see for whom, different users. These are requisitions that are here. If I have one that's open, or if I have one on hold. So let's say I double click here. I could go in and view the requisition. And I could also print the requisition. It would have to be a requisition that I created. So as users go in and create their requisitions, if you wanted to print it directly from Softvision, or if you wanted to email it to vendors, a number of companies do that, this is where you would do it. You would go into your requisition lookup, you would double click, the PO would be here, you would see information, any comments that were here, and then you have the choice to go in and you could send the report by email. It says here, mark successfully, email purchase order is printed. It basically just says, okay, I printed this, if you wanted to keep track of the ones that you printed. And then here it sets up. There is some setup you have to do in the security module, but it's going to attach this as a PDF. So now I could send this off to the vendor and automatically email, or I could just print this, or there's an export. So a number of different options that are here.
And Stuart, that PDF can be customized to look like the client.
Right, we could put a logo right in the upper corner also. So there is some customization that is involved. All right, are there any questions before I go back?
Nothing further at this time.
Let me see. I think we might. Can you batch email POs to vendors? I don't know that. Megan, Linda, do you know if we could batch email POs to vendors? In other
It
words,
isn't-
the way we did it, we just sent one, right? Just
Mhm.
now. But can you, or?
It isn't standard functionality on the dashboard as exists today. Could we analyze if something could be developed? We would have to do the analysis, yes.
Right. Yeah, you would, if you're interested, submit a ticket. We could take a look at it to see. But right now, the functionality is not to do it. It's just one by one. All right, let me just see if there's other questions. I should have gone to a different slide. All right, if no other questions, Megan's going to speak about our next webinar.
Okay, yep. All right, so next webinar we have planned is our MAPS module, which will be reviewing our pre-season assortment planning process. So that's scheduled for next month, October 14th at 3 p.m. Eastern. If you do have any additional questions or comments, you can always email your consultant directly, and we can always address them as needed. All right. So nothing else has come through. So again, we appreciate you taking the time to join us for today's session, and we hope you have a great rest of your afternoon and day. Thank you.